Agate. Sebagai perusahaan game terbesar di Indonesia, kami menghadirkan pengalaman bermain untuk membantu institusi dan perusahaan mencapai potensi terbaiknya melalui gamifications. Berbagai inovasi gamifications untuk meningkatkan engagement di ranah human resource dan marketing tak henti-hentinya kami jelajahi. Kini, kami berupaya menyelesaikan sebuah misi, membagi pengetahuan dan pengalaman kumulatif kami untuk terciptanya kolaborasi dan inovasi gamifications termutakhir. Kami percaya, potensi maksimal manusia bisa tercapai ketika pengalaman menyenangkan menjadi landasannya. Tekan tombol start, dan selamat datang di Gamifigasm.
Hello, now we're back on Gamifigasm, where we're talking about gamification stuff and game-based solution. Today, welcome guys. We are going international, so we are starting to speak in English. We are having international respondent, and I will introduce the new guy called Igor. Please welcome Igor. Hello, Igor. How are you?
Great. Sorry, I was muted. Happy to be here.
Yes, and we have one more actually, right, Igor?
Yep. So we also have with us Eric Najjar, who's a good friend of mine, and I think we can bring him in and to introduce himself, I guess. There you go.
Hello, everybody.
Hey.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, Eric. So, guys, thank you for coming in our session Gamification. Please introduce yourself. What kind of work you're doing right now? What kind of roles and what kind of projects you're working right now? Please, maybe start with Igor because nobody knows Igor right now, although he's working in Agate.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. So I joined Agate last year. I'm currently in the dual role of Chief Marketing Officer and Chief Creative Officer. In Agate, I've been primarily leading the representing for the brand itself and getting our products ready for the international market. I think that's it for me. I've known Eric for almost a decade or over a decade now, and pass it off to him.
Yeah, so I'm Eric Najjar. I am the product manager in charge of all Fintech technology and products over at Pinata. We're a prop tech and a Fintech company, and that's basically what I'm doing, just leading this portfolio right now.
Okay, nice. Thank you, Igor. Thank you, Eric. So actually, Igor who bring Eric joining our podcast today. Thank you very much. So right now we are talking about the gamification stuff, right? Eric is welcome to our podcast because I thought that Igor told me that Eric have done something interesting in his work about gamification. But first, just we have the share perspective first, the same perspective about the gamification. How you see, how you define the gamification? How you define the gamification, Eric?
Yeah, well, that's an interesting thing. I feel like gamification can, it depending on like what it is that it's being used for, and the type of industry it's being used in can have different types of definitions. But at its base level, it's about being able to trigger kind of like those effects that you would get from a game, right? So I think that's something that's like routine based, exciting, dopamine, getting those things firing, and being able to inject those into other types of services and products, so you can get that same effect. So when you think about like going all the way back, we can think about sports, we can think about things that would just people would derive fun from. And that, all through history has been something that people have used to push themselves through a task or through a type of product or service that they've gone through. And now we see with, the advent of, technology and with games that we can actually start on a technological level, integrating them further into our base life.
Yeah, very interesting, very interesting. It makes me curious about where to learn the gamification stuff and you can implement it in your work because based on our perspective, right? Agate is a game development company, which before the gamification stuff, we already developing hundreds of games. So we have learned about the game mechanics, how to make people comfortable in the introduction of the games, and then makes them roll to stay within the games within days, weeks, and months after months, right? Where you got the skill from?
Yeah, so I went to boarding school and I went to college also, as Igor knows, and I played way too many video games. And during that time, no, I'm kidding. No, it's just like, it was one of those things that we picked up over in school, over in university, right? Very specific courses on it, especially, from the marketing and business development standpoint. So, lots of case studies, and then actually starting to apply that into various projects and products that we had been working on. Some of the things that even Igor and I ended up working on, many years ago.
Yeah, and I think to add to Eric's point, and I think this could be interesting to the Indonesian viewer as well. Like for the places like in the US, gamification is something that has been around for a long time, right? It's something to the point where it's been integrated into the curriculum. And Eric is both an industrial design and service design major. Correct me if I'm wrong, Eric.
That's true.
Yeah, and so that was actually part of the service design curriculum, right? And when we met, we were assigned to kind of this industry project. It was SPS first, right, and then HP.
Yes.
SPS was.
that one was.
Tell your first project with Eric.
It was interesting to say the least. It was for this company called the Silver Promotion Service.
Oh man, you remember what it stood for?
Yeah. Remember that box that we had to make? Anyway,
I believe Igor is still storing the documents, right, Igor?
I think that was for the HP stuff. What's interesting is like we've been trying to pitch the concept of gamification locally here for like the last few years, right? Marvin. But it's still treated almost like a foreign concept here locally. As more and more companies integrate, I think most of the unicorns are fairly comfortable with it. But beyond that, it's still kind of a foreign concept. Whereas our experience with gamification, it was just expected that when we design an app, when we design a service, it was integrated into that system, right?
Yeah.
So, what else we had? And yeah, so we first started with Silver Promotion Service, then we worked on HP, and both of them were kind of these large industry level collaborations between our college and these big brands. I think Eric and your team was primarily charged with actually designing the service and integrating gamification whenever necessary, while I was just doing all the fun marketing stuff. And yeah,
we got to do some fun research together.
Yeah, we did.
So, have you researched about gamification before? Have you ever you're doing issuing your white paper about gamification before?
I think that's you, Igor.
Oh, not quite. We didn't do research in that sense. We did research for the service specifically, I think. And so I guess the research that we was primarily about understanding how the users would engage in whatever service we create in the project itself. And I think along the way through that, it's figuring out how to keep those users engaged, how to keep them within the ecosystem. That's Eric and I think the service design team really leaned heavy into the gamification side.
Yeah. I mean, it kind of it ends up being built into itself, because if you think about any product or service, you kind of have this before, during, and after loop, right? So instead of something being linear, right? They get into it, they go through it, and then they exit it. You don't want them to go on. You want them to continue going through this loop. So because that's ingrained, kind of in the fundamentals of what it is that we do, you have to, I think that people initially, without even realizing it, 10, 20 years ago, were implementing gamification as a way to get people to re-engage. So it's all about this re-engagement factor, right? And being able to boost that.
Nice. So yeah, tell me about the more detailed stuff about what you've done in your fintech company, what you've implemented in gamification, using gamification, implemented in your work, the fintech. What's trending in US right there?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of the things that I'm working on right now are in very early development. And I work a lot with, not just our other product managers, but also with our lawyers. So I can't say too much about it. But what I can say What I can say is that we have one product currently that is on the market. It's a newer product. It is a credit building product. And basically the whole idea is that because we are a property management technology and a fintech technology startup, we have married the two sides, and we allow people to boost their credit scores just for paying their rent on time. Totally free product. Yeah, totally free product. There are some hoops that they have to go through because we have to be able to look at their banking information in order to identify their payment. We have to be able to report to the credit bureaus for them. So these things are very difficult and very, very cumbersome just to get people. If you think about that kind of like before, during, and after loop, right? It's very one-sided all on the before side because it's really just kind of like a product where you start things up. You go through all the levels of engaging initially and signing up for it, and then the during phase, right, when you're being reported and you're building your credit, there's not much action happening over there. So one of the things that we started to do is we started to integrate, at least on the development side, and that, you know, these are some of the things that are coming out later, more goal-based activities for our users. So we're getting a lot more into data and information interfacing. We want people to be able to understand and glean insights, and then we want them to be able to take action with those insights. But how do you do that with something as you know, banal as financial information? You have to turn it into a sort of a game for them, right? You have to say, hey, you know, how is it that you want to, you know, like, how would you like your life to be in, let's say, you know, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, and let's help, you know, get you onto that map. So without saying too much more, that's basically the kind of things that I've been working on right now. It's been going through a whole gambit of different types of products, everything from investment focused products over to liabilities. So liabilities are things like debt, credit, all that other stuff, and then getting again into data and information interfacing. So we're going pretty heavy into it, and that's kind of like what I can speak to right now that we've been working on. Yeah.
Yeah, very interesting because in Indonesia, what we are seeing here is the fintech company, or like a property fintech company guys. We're trying to implement gamification in signing up when user need to submit the data, need to complete the data, right? We need to gamify those stuff because people see that completing the forms, like gazillion of stuff, is very demanding for them. So we need to like lure them process by process to make them complete the sign up, even though the service itself is very useful for them, right? And
right,
the next
exactly.
The next challenge I believe is after they signing up, they need to wait, right? It's like the absence of activity, they will forget about the app.
Yeah,
that's the challenge that we need to feel, that what kind of activity that would be relevant to them and still keeping the app within their phone, which is very similar. The challenge is very similar.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's kind of like one of those like age old problems, right? How do you get somebody to do something that's good for them? You know, generally speaking, it's very difficult to get people to you know, like take their medicine in a sense, right? And get them to build healthy habits, because healthy habits are always harder to maintain.
Yeah.
Like unfortunately, you know, so a lot of the work of gamification, like you think about like exercise apps, right? You think about like Peloton and all these other things. You know, they've relied heavily on gamification just to get people to do something that is very at a base level important to them, which is to exercise. Which you think, you know, it's like I'm horrible at keeping up with exercising, right? And then I know in the back of my mind, it's like I should do this more often. But I still don't have that motivation to do it. So gamification is one of those things that we can rely on in order to kind of like push that motivation forward. And you know, we see like a lot of companies, you know, kind of getting stuck at this point with how do we get people to re-engage and continue to engage and engage for the first time.
Yeah, it's very. It makes me wonder what the first time that we want to lure the users to fill the data, right? We need to like give them the instant feedback or the direct reward. Could you share that to us, that what kind of reward that you are using right now within your app?
Yeah, straight cash. We just pay people. No, I'm kidding. You know,
nice.
Yes, we also have we have a reward system. So we do give people rewards like for doing things, you know, for building healthy habits. I think that the most difficult thing, because anybody can give something away, right? You have your cost of acquisition, and as long as your cost of acquisition is lower than the actual lifetime revenue that you'll get from a user, you can spend however much on them. So if you're going to get $1,000 from a user, you can spend $500 to acquire them. But more so, and what's more important than that, I think, is being able to communicate and relate to that user in that specific time frame in a way that is also understandable to them, what the benefit is. That's the part of gamification that I think very often gets left out. People think about it as how do I hook somebody? How do I reward somebody? But there's also a communication aspect of, kind of showing them this vision of the future that is not theirs yet, but can be theirs if they continue to progress forward with it. So that's those are the things that we're working on, because anybody can provide a reward, but very few can actually communicate to a user, to a member, what it's actually going to do for them over the long term.
Yes, I totally agree with that, because there's a limit that how much cash that we could give to the potential users, right? Igor also can share with us some kind of campaign or some kind of user acquisition method with gamification stuff to acquire user within our games that give them other rewards other than cash. I think Igor could share something about it, right, Igor? Do you have gamification?
I don't have anything prepared, but I think what's cool is kind of the stuff that we've done with some of the e-commerce platforms that we've been working with. And I think that's where the interesting kind of space for gamification is headed, right? It's gamification historically has just been focusing on kind of the intrinsic motivations that we can gamify in these in the engagement itself. But what we've seen, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Marvin, I think it's been a few years now, we've started integrating actual games. So these game-based solutions that Agate has been working on the e-commerce side is directly tied to not only what Eric was talking about in terms of showing that long-term promise, it also provides within these ecosystems a currency sink, while also giving them a place to spend and giving them a place to earn those potential points within that space. I think, are we able to talk more about some of those things, Marvin?
But it's exactly true, because in Indonesia, the trend is kind of using the actual games embedded within the apps, so the people could interact, play the literal games, so they could get points, and then after this point will be converted into their loyalty points, and then this loyalty point become the whole economics of the apps. They will use this loyalty point to get even buy more virtual item stuff using that loyalty points, other than getting a discount by buying the real goods via the e-commerce apps. So that's kind of trending in Indonesia right now, doing the real game interaction rather than a gamification stuff. So making people trying to do literal action, specific action, then give them a reward, then make it a habit over time, right? Let's start to introducing the real games, like the slot machine games mechanics, and then we also have the randomizer mechanics, some kind of stuff to keep them accessing the game, because the tickets to play the games will be refreshed every day.
I think what could be kind of an interesting point of query for us here, is to talk more about, let's say, from our end, Marvin and I, we've seen a lot of the actual game-based solutions being integrated into e-commerce very, very quickly, and the usage is very apparent. Do you see a potential in that kind of spreading into the fintech space?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, just as kind of getting people to stay on a, so one thing that basically staying through a process, right? So one thing that is a little bit more complicated when it comes to fintech products is that you're working through various layers of security and various layers of API level connections, right? So in those cases, sometimes the calls have a latency to them. And it can take something like 30 seconds or a minute to connect some type of financial account. So it's like, what can you have the user do? Well, you can have that operate in the background and say, hey, this is going to take a moment. So continue to explore the app or go on to the next step, right? While we continue to connect this. But you end up at this very weird, forking point where what happens if the connection fails and they've gone through the other processes within the app. And now they have that kind of this disjointed experience where they've completed some of the next steps. They're really excited, and now their hopes and dreams have been dashed. It's at the same time, you can also do something like, hey, this is going to take a moment. Why don't you play this game? And it can be a very simple game. For instance, Chrome, when Google Chrome, right? When you have no internet connection, and I ride the train all the time. So sometimes my internet connection will go out while I'm reading an article, and I have that dinosaur jumping game, right? It keeps me on Chrome. It keeps Chrome open. It does its base job, which is to get me to stay within that app until I have service again. So it's can you integrate things like that in order to get people to maintain their engagement while you are currently connecting to their data source? Absolutely. I think that could potentially be another path towards keeping users engaged and not getting them, not making a sign up process seem too laborious for them. And then when you go into the actual, I think when you get into the actual kind of interfacing of their information, there's another layer of gamification that you can include. I think that you can actually start to create, personalized games for them. And, this would be, if you have basically kind of a blank slate game, something that is very simple, and you're able to glean their various pieces of their information, you can start giving them things like trivia, whether it's about themselves. You can start giving them, various types of games where they have to grab certain things, where they have to be able to progress and collect certain things that all are connected to the types of things that you've collected from their own accounts, right? And from their own connection points. So you can start doing things like that. And as you're doing that, you start to get to know the user a little bit better. You can start integrating boosts, and you can say oh, you lost a life, but answer this question about yourself, right? And you get them to progress through this, and now they're having fun, and maybe they come back to it every so often. Or maybe it's only while they're connecting a new account, whether it's a liabilities account or a banking account or anything like that. Or if it's while you are waiting for them to or it's it could be an introduction celebratory thing, hey, you've done this and you've met your first goal, and now try and boost the reward that we are giving you, right? And you can go through this whole process. So I definitely think that there are some places where you can do that. The problem with overall in fintech, right now with integrating gamification too much, is that you end up with this point where you may not be considered serious.
Right.
So you have to balance these two things, right? Nobody wants to go into, as fun as it sounds, nobody wants to go into their bank and see the teller playing foosball, in the back. Yeah, sure, it might be really fun for them, and they very well may deserve it. But it creates an image issue where people say this is all of my money, this is my life, what are you doing with it? So you end up in this weird place where you kind of have to balance this idea of allowing people to have fun and allowing people to also trust in your brand. I think one of the companies at a consumer level that has done this pretty well, not from a gamification standpoint, but just from a humanistic standpoint, which is kind of analogous, is Capital One. They've opened up their cafes, they've broken down the barriers between their tellers and the actual consumers. This is, of course, before the pandemic. And just being able to create a little bit more of a humanistic flow for that service experience has been extremely beneficial for them. And it hasn't gone in the way of people considering them as a serious banking partner. Just because you can grab a cup of coffee there and you can lounge there and hang out does not detract from the fact that you could you can also have a credit line with them, and you can trust them to maintain that for you. So there's definitely places. I think that it's still being figured out to a sense, and there is this very fine line to walk with it.
Yeah, even too fun could become a pitfall for the app, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of the ideas. I mean, I've been in brainstorming sessions with a lot of companies also, and sometimes they have really great ideas, and I say, this is fantastic, but this is an idea for a different company.
Yeah.
It just doesn't meld well with what it is that they're trying to do for their base user.
Okay, so rather than it's too fun could become a pitfalls right now. How about the social stuff? Because I believe that in US the culture is very westernized, and right now in Indonesia it's kind of Eastern culture, right? Because we like very proud about our social thing. So everything, even our bank account, have a joint bank account that we could like saving, and we track like how many people already saved to our joint account. How about the social stuff? Have you ever implemented a social feature in your fintech product?
So we've debated this, and I've also debated this with other types of products. I think that like from a social standpoint, right, the most famous example would be Venmo, right, for a fintech product with a social aspect to it. Not exactly sure Venmo is keeping that, which is an interesting thing. I've heard that they are potentially removing it. There's definitely a social and community aspect to be had when it comes to financial products. It really depends on the type of financial product, right? You definitely don't want it when it comes to things like your credit lines, your mortgage, that kind of stuff. But do you want it in order to maybe be able to compare yourself to the overall average of what percentage of income a user is saving? So you can't judge savings based on the actual raw number, right? Because everyone has different levels of income. But you could, if you have enough information from enough users, say, okay, the average person on this platform or the average account or whatever it is able to save X amount per month or X amount quarterly or annually. And this is where you rank. And do you want to try and boost it? And you could put them into leagues. And, of course, this is if they opt into it. So is that a way to kind of start to integrate slowly this social aspect where also how much information do you put out? Do you allow the person to provide their name? Maybe, maybe not. You kind of have to it's a very layered issue, and I think that once it's kind of one of these things where the problems, they snowball, but it's not impossible to get over. Because as you go over one hurdle, you realize that you've now amplified every potential issue that you could have when it comes to security with a fintech product. But it's definitely there. I think we're a little bit of a way off on it though.
I see. Yeah, I think Igor could also share the majority of differences between the US privacy and then between in US and Indonesia. What is the difference that social gamification could work between these two regions?
Yeah, I think locally in Indonesia, the social gamification or the integration into these banking services is really all about, at least locally, it's going to be primarily based around the family unit itself, right? I think Asian parents, there is that overwhelming sense of the helicopter parent being the typical Asian parent, and having that integration into okay, are your kids saving? Are these things? And that's, I think, a huge potential for the local market. And I think that's where, in terms of privacy, it kind of straddles that line, right? Where until a certain age, it's probably a good idea for children's savings accounts and everything to be tied to a parental account. And from within those specific processes, right?
Yeah.
It would be ideal for a parent to be able to incentivize those kids, whether it's through actual game-based products within the platform itself, or even some sort of ranking within the family, because then that removes that. I guess there's still a bit of a stigma locally, right, in terms of competing and sharing that data openly with one another. I think more and more, correct if I'm wrong, Eric, but my sense of it is that I think more and more privacy is going to become a primary issue, and the whole public leaderboard, knowing savings and everything, it's great for data and it's great for people to be able to talk about a certain industry, but on a personal level, fewer and fewer people will want that, I think.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, privacy is privacy is a huge issue. And then you also get into kind of the ethics of privacy and the ethics of data and information, because you start getting into AI and ML models, and they are inherently biased based on the information, the aggregate data, right, that is coming into them and actually being analyzed. So how do you also maintain an ethical system when you know that your information itself is potentially skewed? And that gets also again into what is this combination between like humans and machines as we start to like further and deeper integrate the sources of like data that we utilize or receive from gamification. So it's a huge thing. Yeah.
I think an interesting point to that as well is I think for like at the moment, the way gamification is used is mostly on the competitive side, right? There's, we mentioned leaderboards, we mentioned comparing, segments or income brackets or whatever within these systems, right? The thing is, I think that's still the whole notion of competition. I think is still, while it excites and motivates a lot of people around the world, I think the people who are actually motivated to compete in that sense is more likely to be more of a Western culture thing than as opposed to an Indonesian, or in some sense, yeah, I'd say particular to Indonesia, I think that sense of competition is less prevalent. We've seen it in some cases, right, where we've implemented leaderboard rankings in one of our like learning apps, Levio, for example. And we've seen one lady just like boost up the leaderboard on a crazy sense. But like that's still, that's a singular case out of a company of a few thousand, right? And so it's still the sense of competition. I don't think is going to be a primary driver over time. It would be interesting to see where that goes in terms of how we manage to integrate social pressures without relying too much on competition locally.
Right. You can also get into like, self-based goals and that kind of stuff, right? And that's, that was like one of the other things that I was talking about before, where you can measure a person against themselves, right? So if we think about like an exercise app, you were able to run, half a mile. What is your goals? You want to be able to run 2 miles. Okay, these are the steps. This is the push that we're going to give you. And there's been a bunch of like, cool and famous cases. There's one where there's an app that has like, as you're running, or I don't know if it still exists, but as you're running, it says like there are zombies chasing you and you have to continue running. Yeah. Right, exactly. So, there's other ways to include kind of like that aspect of like fun pressure that keeps you motivated, for like in order to get you pushing towards a goal. I guess, the other thing is what is the overall business case? What is the use case? And that has to be married with this also. In some cases, yes, you can create a fantastic solution that keeps people engaged, but it doesn't keep them engaged in the right way, right? So that's the other thing you have to be careful of.
Yeah, I just want to point out that in Indonesia, like a cumulative objective. I mean, like forming a group with the families, and we have like reaching the goals together by saving, and we're tracking how much I've been saving versus like my spouse have been saving to the account. Actually works in Indonesia because we have like kind of like want to experience the goal together, not alone, because when we posting our Instagram account that we are going traveling alone, it's kind of sad in Indonesia. So yeah, joint objective would be very nice implementation in the Fintech application in Indonesia. Okay.
Yeah, and we have those, like, we have those here, right? You can fork.
Yeah.
I mean, like in a very basic sense, right? So if you have a bank account and you can create sub bank accounts under it, and you can have people that join into it, and you guys can you can deposit money into it, and then you can kind of like see that that those deposits go up. So it's one of those cool things where like couples, families, they'll save together so they can go towards like a common goal. It's like a car, vacation, or whatever it is. No, so I completely think that's totally relevant. I think also I don't know about in Indonesia, but in the US, one of the really like early and most prevalent cases of gamification has always been this like B2C connection, right? So I think that has always been the easiest type of kind of like sense to integrate in. So you think about like you're a user, right? You go to a store, you get a punch card, and you go there 5 times or 10 times, and you get something for free, a free coffee, a free meal, whatever it is. And then you ended up with other companies, like with other tech companies coming up, even like 10, 15 years ago, where the more that you checked into places, the more that you purchased at places, the more points you would accrue, right? So then you think about like Open Table, and they have a whole model of the more that you interact with restaurants, the more you go to restaurants, the more points you get, the more free meals you can end up getting. So there's that level of it. And there's also like I think the reason behind that is because there's a revenue stream attached to it. There's a direct business case, at least for one side of the stream, connected to it. And with a lot of companies, they are not going to integrate something if it is just a loss leader. There needs to be something that it connects to if it's going to be a loss leader, in order for it to make financial sense. So yeah, those are like also the overlooked concepts of like early gamification.
Actually, that's an interesting kind of like point that you raised there, right? So right now, in the e-commerce examples that we've talked about, right, it's a lot of it is this notion of almost playing to earn, but you're earning points in very minuscule amounts and everything. I think, and this is potentially pie in the sky, kind of like off topic, but I think it'd be fun to explore, right? Let's see, I think with the advent of new technologies like cryptocurrencies and NFTs, where there's this inherent valuation based on scarcity, do you see a potential kind of like trend where that sort of play to earn model in these game-based solutions integrated in-app, branching out into that, using those technologies through like NFT generation or something?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's a little bit of the Wild West out there right now, right?
Yeah.
So it's one of those things where it is very difficult for a company to utilize it now, but I 100% think that's going to get towards there. Rewards-based tokens and all this other stuff. It hits something that we inherently enjoy, which is risk. And a lot of the time it is in a consumable way, in a way that does not terrify you too much, so that you don't take that risk. I think that absolutely you'll see users that they have, is it possible that there's some company out there, whether it's an e-commerce or otherwise, that says, hey, we can give you this refund for this product, or thank you for purchasing with us, and you've gotten you get this gift certificate. Hey, do you want to take a chance and switch this for this token? We don't know what it is. You'll unlock it. You'll find out what it is. It's currently tradable right now, and then it'll be further tradable once you actually unlock and reveal what it is. That can absolutely happen. I think that that is probably a little ways off, at least in the US, just because of securitization, right? So you're passing around tokens, and there's securities, and now you have that SEC involved, and you have to kind of be a little bit more careful with what it is that you're actually doing. And then also people need crypto wallets, so they need to be a little bit more easily navigable in that sense.
Yeah, I think the point is the gamification or game-based solution stuff is keep evolving right now. 3 or 5 years ago, industry has been using games to communicate their brands to the users, like a B2C models, the interaction like a marketing campaign, and they're transitioning because of the advancement of the technology and the interaction. They're trying to shifting also using the games for the training purposes, because we are having VR, AR, and MR. The technology is getting there, right? The flow of information is getting faster. So right now they're also trying to using the games or the gamification to motivate users, to engage the users to do the investment. One of them is a cryptocurrency right now. So I guess as long as there is a way to engage users, gamification will be still evolving. How we will use this knowledge to keep users engaged and motivate doing their stuff. And in the business side, they will also make the users to reach their objective, which is ultimately is revenue and profitability.
Yeah, exactly. And it's also interesting to think about kind of like who is actually engaging with those early forms of gamification for, something like a financial product or an e-commerce product or anything, right? So it's usually like a little bit more like early adopters, and you have to also take into account that you will eventually hit a point where you have burned through all those people that are actually open to it, and you have to figure out a way to engage the overall populace. And as businesses, right, everybody's working towards there at the same time. They're working with a finite subset of the actionable market from the user standpoint, and then you plateau because that solution no longer works for everybody else. Like something that works for like a 25 to 35-year-old probably won't work for a 55 to 65 or 55 to 70-year-old. So then you say like, okay, well, we have to keep on growing, right? We have to keep on, building our revenue. How do we do that? What is that next level? And what does gamification look like for a different generation or for a different subset of the market? And you can slice it up however, like which way you want. But that also becomes like another thing to think about.
But people have been struggling in segmenting our user base towards what gamification works for the X generation or Y generation or for millennials, right, Igor?
So one of the things we're trying to do right now is to answer that very question, Eric, because it's I think having grown up with games, like all the three of us here, generally have a rough idea on what games meant to us, right? The thing is, like, as we go into, like, say, the Gen X section, the games that they're used to are very different from the games that we played growing up, right? And so the motivation models then tend to skew as well, where let's say, I would say, like, if you were to say the average millennial would likely see more of that core game loop leading more into the action and kind of like the potential consequences of their actions going to the reward cycle. I think that reward cycle has to be a lot quicker for the average Gen Xer, primarily because of just how quickly technology has evolved, how quickly they've seen things that they can get, right? We used to wait for the mail. They grew up with email, right? We, like our generation grew into using email, right? Whereas they knew, like, the average Gen Xer would not know anything.
I think you mean Gen Zer.
Gen Z, my bad. Yeah.
It's okay. No worries. So but yes.
And then, like, from there, we can even further segment it out because, I think with data, we're able to segment out different motivations. And I think, that's going to be a bit of an interesting space for us and my team right now. Thank you for the help, Marvin, as well.
Well, I'm happy that I'm not in your shoes right now. I will learn from you and from your potential mistakes.
Talking about the mistakes, so could you guys share the pitfalls? What are the pitfalls when people are trying to implement gamification?
There are no pitfalls. It's perfect. There's never
been an issue. It's so easy.
I think the biggest pitfall, right, if we can just go right into it, is addiction. So you think about like a casino, or you think about various apps that are focused on children, which this whole has been kind of like plugged now by app stores, where you can't just go and you can't just like charge up $500 in in-app purchases, but all those things are very much addiction based, and it goes back to this older model, which is extremely old. I think it's as old as time, right? You get somebody hooked on something, and you saw it with like tobacco, and all that other stuff, even like before that, when they were starting to figure it out. And they're starting to come out with like different flavors for the first time in like the 80s or something like that. But like that's like the first one, and that's like the most direct and obvious part of it. You'll always have people that use this tool in a nefarious manner. Unfortunately, that's the same with any tool, right?
There will be a spectrum between the very exploitative one and a very ethical one, right? So we need to like choose in between.
Right.
And there's also kind of like there's plenty of, like, between that segment itself, there's also how easily is the product itself or the game itself easily exploitable from the user side, right? Let's say if you have a point-based system based on just users engaging in a certain, let's say, game-based product within attached to a loyalty system, right?
Right.
At a certain point, it's potentially more advantageous for the user to just sit there and play all day to earn these loyalty points than to actually spend any. Right. And so that balance is interesting.
And then and working off of that, you end up in a place where there are times where a company is just hemorrhaging money because of the gamification based system that they set up, where users might become too invested in it. They're not actually utilizing any of the other parts of the platform, and now it's just a money dump, and it either has to be recalibrated, it has to be pulled, or if the company doesn't get a hold on it quick enough, they go broke. So from a business standpoint, there are also ill effects from gamification. And you have to be careful that it is not something that just leeches off of you.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree. That's the point. Is gamification could be very useful for the business to keep user engaged or to keep the employee engaged using the gamification system, or even using the game itself to make them engaged. But remember, the ultimate part is how the business could reach their ultimate objective using the gamification stuff.
That's why Agate has you, to keep them on track, make sure that gamification and everything is not going awry.
Exactly. Thank you for pointing that, Eric.
I think that is a good point too, because there is this sense currently, right? The gamification is a solution, or just like this magic button that fixes all of these issues, and it's a tool. It's a framework. It's a frame of mind that needs to be used kind of carefully. And then going to what we offer, specifically in Agate, which actually integrates games, right? There's that balance of, okay, is it really, really dangerous at a certain point? I think my favorite actual game integrated game-based or gamified solution in my marketing has been in recent years the Monopoly game in the States, the McDonald's one. I don't know if you recall, Eric. I got really into it.
I do recall. I remember that.
And it got to a really unhealthy level where I was trying to eat McDonald's every single meal because I just wanted those damn coupons. And it's great from business sense, but if you look at it from a country's perspective, right? This is a generation that had already grown up being a bit, let's say, on the larger side, and are now further incentivized to engage in the fast food, a fast food restaurant because it's now gamified. Like, you go in there, you get something, and it feels good while you're also eating something very, very unhealthy. So that could be interesting.
Yeah, exactly. That gets into the addictive side, right? And a lot of those ill effects of gamification.
Yeah, I guess kind of very interesting to talking about the history of the gamification stuff. So how do you guys see the future of the gamification and game-based solution right now? Would you rather this gamification stuff will be used as a mainstream method of every application or every business out there? Or would it be like the gamification is kind of just like a short-term trend that there will be up and downs for the implementation? What do you think, guys?
I definitely don't think it's short term. This is an inherent, piece of humanity. I'm going to think on this a little bit more.
All right. I think while Eric has a little breather to think, for mine, I think it's as technology gets better and the games kind of get easier and easier to make, I think we're going to start seeing the concept of gamification itself shift, right? I think more and more apps aren't being designed as apps. They're going to start to design it almost completely as a video game in itself. That could be interesting. Like, how does, let's say, an app like OpenTable, if envisioned through the lens of a game designer, a game maker, it's not about gamifying anymore. It's just, how is this going to be a video game? How does engaging on a menu or finding a restaurant to eat for the night? I remember early on, one of those apps like OpenTable, they made it so that it's just almost like a roulette wheel. And it's interesting. You get a genre, you get a type, you get a distance. And that in itself that's not just gamification. That's already basically playing a video game with your dinner or choosing dinner, right? And I think as the process of making games gets a bit more sophisticated and easier, at the same time, because it's as it gets easier for everybody, the complexities gets to grow a little bit more. We get to have a bit more nuance in what games and what game-based solutions we make. Right?
Yeah. I think I completely agree. There was something, I don't remember which app it was. It was like a food app or something, and I didn't know what I wanted to eat, and they had an option to just like show me like random things, and I clicked on it. I didn't like any of the options. I didn't end up ordering it, but it was kind of like it was fun. I think like more long term, think about kind of just like things become, they will start blurring those lines, right? Just like Igor was saying. So how does an app end up blurring those lines, or how does a company end up blurring those lines between lifestyle and also their main focus? And I think that one of the things that is kind of like an early indicator of this is that a lot of things are moving over to being subscription based. So you can kind of see companies starting to kind of force users into a more long-term engagement just by virtue of how a person is paying for it, right? So subscriptions have gone up. What will we see in the future? So Volvo has a car subscription now, right? Other companies are going to move towards car subscriptions also. You see rideshare, right, which is not a car subscription, but you could get a monthly pass, and you could, in a sense, basically subscribe to it because you don't own a car, you just get driven around everywhere. And then it's like, well, what else is next? Are you going to get a subscription to IKEA? Maybe instead of buying a coffee table, you have a subscription to a coffee table for, $40 a month for the rest of your life. And every, 2 months, it's basically like leasing, not 2 months, 2 years, you switch it out for a new coffee table, regardless of the damage, or you do it with your mattress or whatever it is. I think that subscription focus is an early indicator towards the companies and the types of things that are going to try to utilize gamification as a more heavy engagement mechanism. So, you see it in Ford's EcoBoost, right? So in like one of their cars many years ago, I don't know if they still do this, the more eco-friendly you were driving, so the less that you were hitting the pedal hard, the more you'd have these like green leaves and vines.
I remember that one, yeah.
Like expanding over your display. So it'd show you in a more interactive way that you were driving in a way that was saving on fuel. So that's like a very like early like proof of it. So like, where do these things go? I think they get pretty deep into a person's lifestyle. The companies that I talk to, when I ask them, when we talk about their users, it is the kind of thing where they want to, if they know what they're doing, they envision their users as somebody who is engaged with them over a lifetime period, or over a very specific section of their life. So for things like that, you kind of need to like, you have to have a way to engage with them that is both fun and that is also objective focus based on what the role of the business is in that person's life.
Yes, I totally agree with that. Because everything, I think the game part and the interaction with the application for the utility usage part is getting blurrier right now. Like I believe in the future that everything would be in game mode, or maybe everyone would be use games as their engagement and their media interactivity, because the game itself has the instant feedback element, and also they have the engagement element. They will keep the users using the app more and more, right?
Right. I think another interesting thing, or like two things that I'd like to bring up. One, regulation, right? So we already see regulation around, certain types of like direct gaming. Will we see like at some point in the future regulation around gamification, or is it the kind of thing where if the industry moderates itself and businesses moderate themselves, that they can push that off? And I think that's a potential. That's something that can end up really blowing things up at a certain point, and forcing people to rethink how it is that they are utilizing those like basic instinctive features.
I'd like to add on something interesting that you brought up earlier, right, with the subscriptions and the engagement with gamification game-based solutions. Like most of what we've been talking about has been B2C. It's all about how do we keep the consumers engaged and everything. And I think one of the more interesting examples that you did actually, Eric, was the subscription model on a B2B side. So for some context, Marvin, long after we met, a few years after college, Eric and I ended up going into a startup together, and it was a B2B enterprise marketplace, basically, for the pet industry. And one of the ideas that Eric had implemented in it was a subscription model from a manufacturer to a retailer. You want to talk more about that, Eric?
Yeah. So, what we were able to do with it, and let me know if I start veering off into something. Yeah. But the whole idea was to be able to lower the operational costs for the manufacturers and for the brands, and be able to lower the per unit acquisition costs for the retailers. And we did this through a subscription-based model. And the whole idea of the subscription-based model was, well, retailers don't always have the ability for two constraints, from a stockroom, a space constraint, and also from a financial constraint to place a very large order. And brands also often have to contend with these smaller orders, which are more expensive, more difficult to pack, more difficult to fulfill, both from a logistics and a shipping standpoint, but also just from an overall business development and being able to make sure that you're manufacturing, and also upstream of your supply chain, that you have enough products coming in. So by normalizing it and by actually allowing retailers to provide their intended purchase and then provide that information to the brands and to the manufacturers, we're able to lower their per unit costs around 36% on average, with shipping included. And it was this very successful program. Probably one of the most successful programs that we had ever come out with.
Yeah. And I think that's the fun, the really interesting space to explore, right? Game-based solutions or gamification within how businesses interact with one another, I think is going to be the next big frontier. It could be interesting to see just how I often talk about the sales process to our sales team and our consultant and the marketing team, right? A lot of sales, a lot of marketing it's a game. It's a game between myself and a potential client. It's a bit of a dance, right? And so why not take it literally? And there's something interesting there.
And dance with them.
Exactly. Well, I mean, think about it, right? As the generations get younger, as people like us who have been more exposed to video games, go into positions where we are becoming key decision makers in these companies, the way we negotiate, the way we deal on a business to business level will change. I don't think it's going to be as formal as, you me in a suit, you in a suit, and let's hash it out. What used to be, discussed over a cigar and a glass of whiskey could potentially be discussed over a game, or I was gonna say a 1v1 match or something. It could be interesting, right?
Could be over Settlers of Catan.
I would love that, actually. I would absolutely love that.
It's also I think that you're definitely onto something there. This also brings into play the fact that when you do have a product or a service or something that you are selling, oftentimes you're selling to two completely different bases, right? You have the people that actually will be applying it, and those are your managers or whoever. But then you also have leadership and the executive team. Those are the ones that don't see the day-to-day benefits of it, and all they see are the costs being incurred, and they're looking at it from a what is our financial standpoint, right? So you have to be able to convince them also. It's that becomes its own game, because you're constantly balancing these two different opposing forces within the same organization. You have to be able to provide two different lines of communication for them.
Yeah, it's almost two different packages of information. Right? Right, this is how your company's going to benefit, and then straight to the user side, this is how those guys will actually keep using your platform.
Yep. It's tough. It's tough.
Yeah. Because that's what Marvin is going to have to do on a day-to-day basis, basically, right? You're convincing an older generation who are currently still in key decision-making processes. This is how it's going to work. Yes,
and for most of them, it's totally a new concept for them to making their employees playing games and still achieving their business objectives. It's very new to them. Yeah. All right. Yeah, I think It's been a very interesting talk. Thank you, Eric and Igor, for joining Gamifigasm. Yeah, we have discussed a broad topic of gamification from starting the similarities and differences of the implementation, ongoing trends, pitfall, core objective, even to ethical issue of using the gamification stuff. Yeah, it's very interesting. Thank you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. This has been fun.
Yeah. We haven't had a chance to chat a lot more, Eric, so I have to drag you out here just to get you in a room with me.
Exactly. I've been a bad friend.
Exactly.
Okay, maybe
since you last visited.
Okay, maybe stop for the chit chat first. Let's continue after this. Let me close this session first, okay?
Sounds good.
Okay, guys, thank you. Thank you for joining. Stay tuned for the gamification, where we are talking about how we can use the game for your business solution and also like gamification tips for day-to-day basis. Stay tuned, guys. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye, everyone.
Terima kasih telah menonton Gamifigasm.